Everybody, thank you for having me. Before I start, one thing, I would love to tell you that the slides that you're seeing here were drawn by my cute and adorable 5-year-old daughter. Unfortunately, I don't have a cute and adorable 5-year-old daughter. It was me. Okay, so this is an experiment. This is the first time I'm doing this. For whatever reason, this seemed to be a good idea, so bear with me, please. So I want to talk about entrepreneurship. Before I do that, I'd love to talk a little bit about myself in all shortness. I'm Swiss. I'm just mentioning this because we saw this slide before where you saw that Sweden was #2 in innovation worldwide, and you remember who was #1? It was us. I also happen to have a degree in medieval history. That's not really relevant. It's just really weird, and I like to tell people about it, so do with that whatever you want. And I used to be a journalist for a really long time. But the real reason why I'm here today is because I started something called Sandbox. What you see in the upper right corner there is my really pitiful try to hand-draw our logo, and I really, really pray that our designer is not watching this. He's going to kill me. So if you want to, it's a really beautiful logo. If you want to see it, go to the website. This does not do it justice. Anyway, so Sandbox was started 5 years ago, and what we tried to do is to build a global community for young entrepreneurial people. It was really more of a idea that we had. It turned into a really big thing. By now we have about 1,000 members in more than 30 cities worldwide. We had over 25,000 people apply over the course of these 4 years. And now what Sandbox really does and what we want to do is try to bring these young people who are trying to build new things together and help them connect to each other, support each other, give each other advice, really become what we like to call a family. And that's what Sandbox is all about. Now, today I want to talk about entrepreneurship, which we've heard a little bit about before already. I learned a lot about entrepreneurship during my time at Sandbox. I recently sort of stepped down from day-to-day operations, handed over to a new team, and it seemed to be a good time to reflect a little bit what I have learned and what would be the advice that I would give to, new people who want to start a company, want to become entrepreneurs. So today I'm going to share my insights with you by talking about 5 really big pieces of advice when it comes to entrepreneurship. The first one is have a vision. So you start out and it's a small thing, you just have maybe a small product, but you have to have a big vision. You need to know where you're going, you need to think big, and you can never ever lose sight of that vision. So at Sandbox, when we started, we had nothing. We didn't have money, we didn't have an organization, nobody knew whether what we wanted to do was actually going to work, but we had this vision, and we just kept pursuing it, and step by step by step, we actually got where we wanted. And that, I think, is really important. It's something to very easily lose sight of in the day-to-day when you're trying to struggle and when you're trying to get the money, but it's really important to stick to your vision and pursue it. The second thing, and that may sound a little bit counterintuitive at first when you start, but you really have to build things for eternity. You have to give your startup, you have to give the company that you're building a really, really long time horizon. You have to make it sustainable. You have to find a way for really, thinking not in just the next 6 months or the next year or the next 18 months, but think in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. At Sandbox, we always talked about how does this organization, how is it going to look 100 years from now? And while it's very hard to figure out, it will give you a certain stability. It will allow you to really go in the right direction in the long term. The third one, take big risks. Entrepreneurship is definitely not for the faint at heart. Sometimes you really have to take big risks, and all these stories of entrepreneurs, going all in, putting all the chips on one number, taking a really big risk, and then reaping a really, really big reward. We did that at Sandbox many times. We used to do consulting as our first sort of revenue stream, and this worked great. And we earned money, but we felt it was not the right thing for us. We felt it was not what we really wanted to do. So we gave it up, and we turned around, and we tried something new. It was at the time a really big risk. We were essentially throwing away money, but it was something that we felt we really needed to. We needed to jump off this cliff. A fourth advice, and this is especially important for businesses, and which business today isn't, that are connected to the internet, and somehow scaling is everything. If you think about your business model, if you think about your business, you really, really need to think about scaling. It's not about getting 1 customer, it's not about getting 10 customers, it's about getting hundreds, thousands, millions of customers. So you really need to think, how do I scale this up? How do I make it really big? How can I make this something that is all around the world all the time? And the reality really is, if you don't scale, eventually somebody else will figure out how to do it, and you're going to lose out. The last one, you have to fail fast. If you start a company, you're going to fail. Things will break. It's inevitable. It happens all the time. What's not inevitable and what you need to avoid actually is that you repeatedly run into the same wall, that you repeatedly run into this really big obstacle that is in front of you. If you fail, it's going to happen. Learn from it quickly, find another way, find a way to get around that big obstacle and try something else. So these are my 5 recommendations. Remember, you need to have a vision. You need to build for eternity. You need to take big risks. You need to think about scaling. And if you fail, you need to fail fast. Now, I'm not quite sure how much time I have left, but it seems to me there is a little bit of time left. So let me tell you a story. There was a US president called Harry Truman, and he's said to have said once, very angrily, that he would like to have a one-handed economic advisor. Because his economic advisors kept telling him when he asked them a question, well, on one hand, but then on the other hand, and it made him very furious. So he wanted to have a one-handed economic advisor who could only on one hand, and Truman knew what to do. So this story, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure, but this story has been used over decades to kind of make fun of economists. And let's be honest, who doesn't like to make fun of economists? I certainly do, but in a way, I always felt bad for these economic advisors because you see, entrepreneurship is a lot like economics. There are no clear answers. And usually, when you say something, you mean on one hand, but then there's always also another hand. So, everything I just told you, all the advice I just gave you, that was just the one hand. There's also another hand. So, I think we still have the time, so let's do this again, shall we? All right. So we talked about this vision. But really, it's great if you have a vision at the beginning, but usually in my experience, that's not the case. What you have is a hunch. You have this feeling. You know that there's something there. But you can't really put this in a coherent vision that you're going to pursue forever and ever and ever and ever. So what you really need to do is to keep asking what your vision is. So I told you before that at Sandbox we did have a vision from the beginning, and we did. You know what? It turned out to be completely wrong. It didn't work. So we went back and we asked ourselves, well, okay, what is it really? And then we found a new answer. And then it turned out to work better, but still not perfectly. So we asked again, and we're still asking to this day, 5 years in. And we're going to keep asking for a very, very long time. So the really important thing is not to build this grand vision and then just try to go after it. The really important thing is ask yourself every day when you get up, what do I want? And the answer is going to change, and that's perfectly okay. Yes, of course you should build for eternity. Of course you should build a company with the possibility in mind that it goes on to live forever. But you know what? Companies rarely live forever. In fact, I don't think any company has ever lived forever. And the issue here is that if you have this fixed idea in mind that your company has to live forever, you're raising the price of restarting. And sometimes that's the best idea. Sometimes it will just make sense to say, okay, there is something so fundamentally not working that we just need to go back and restart. 9 out of 10 companies fail. It's a reality of starting a business. Most entrepreneurs who are successful, and those are the ones that then give talks about how to become successful and give you all this advice, they kind of make it sound like everything worked out the first time around. It's usually not true. Usually, the ones who are successful have a couple of really big failures under their belt. The reason they became successful is because they restarted early on. Taking big risks. Again, of course you should take risks. It's no fun if you don't take risks. But it's not roulette. You don't put all your chips on one number. It's a really, really bad idea. Think of it more a little bit like poker. Good poker players don't go all in all the time. They manage the risk. And a very good rule of thumb is, if you take risks, and you should, if you take risks, get some sort of parachute before you jump off that cliff. Make sure that if you take a risk, you only take as much risk so that you can try again if you fail. Because if you don't, you're never going to get anywhere. yes, scaling is not everything. In fact, it is highly, highly overrated. And again, I think here we've seen a little bit of the dark side of this huge and very positive trend of internet businesses becoming big and becoming dominant in the conversation. Is we have this idea of scaling, and every young entrepreneur who's 18 and building something in his home thinks that he immediately needs to reach millions and millions of customers. It's not true. At the beginning, scaling is completely overrated. You can worry about scaling later. What you need to do at the beginning is build an amazing product, and then you need to spend an incredible amount of time and an incredible amount of energy to get your first 10 customers. You have to make sure that these first 10 people are the happiest people on the planet, and then the other million, they'll come all by themselves. But if you worry about scaling very early on, it'll just take time away from what you actually need to do, which is build a great product. And finally, failing. This is everybody loves talking about failing in the context of entrepreneurship, and I agree it's important, and I agree that a good culture of failure is essential for a good entrepreneurial culture. The tricky part here is to ask yourself, when have you actually failed? What constitutes failure? Just because you try something once and it doesn't work doesn't necessarily mean that you failed. And there's this word that has been making the rounds, and everybody in Silicon Valley at least loves, just like pivoting, right? So you don't say you failed, you say you pivot into a new direction. And it makes a lot of sense, only it seems to me that people very quickly pivot if just something doesn't work. So what I've learned is that sometimes you just got to keep trying. Things will not work the first time around, they will not work the second time around. The tricky part, and what's defines a successful entrepreneur, is understanding when you've tried enough. But it's rarely just the first time around. So especially for small things, for the everyday things, it's really worthwhile trying. I usually make this example of, I recently started rock climbing, which is not something I ever did in my life, so I'm really bad at it. And you have all these projects that you need to climb up, and usually what you do when you try one is you fail. And you fail like really badly. You can't even get like the first hole, and then you fall down and it looks ridiculous. But the idea is that you keep trying. And the idea is that you don't just keep trying once or twice. The idea is that you keep trying 20, 50, 100 times until you just even get into the right starting position. And then you try another 100 times until you can move your left hand up in the next position, and so on and so on and so on. This is really a lot about iteration and about trying. Of course, eventually, you will just have to accept that maybe you failed in something and then you try something new. But before you do that, really ask yourself, have you tried enough? Well, this now all sounds a little bit ambivalent and maybe confusing and maybe frustrating because there are no clear answers for upcoming entrepreneurs. But I don't think that necessarily has to be, because I think ambivalence is what makes it awesome. Ambivalence is fantastic. I think the great entrepreneurs that we've seen and that we will see are the ones that embrace ambivalence, that love it, that thrive on it. So if you want to become an entrepreneur, don't be a one-handed entrepreneur. Don't be one of these people who just follows advice blindly and tries to do it exactly the same way that somebody else did, because it's not going to work. Entrepreneurship is hard. It's an art. And the only way to succeed is to not just to use both hands, but also both legs, and your brain and your heart and everything. And if you do that, I think there's a good chance of succeeding. Now, does that mean you shouldn't listen to any of the advice, including the one I'm just giving you? Yes, you should. You should get a lot of advice. You should have great advisors. You should have great board members. But with everything they say, take it with a little grain of salt. Don't just blindly follow it. Think about it. Think if it makes sense for you. Think if you really believe in it, and then take a decision, and then do it. Now, to not leave you like this, and to not leave you like completely confused, I have two final pieces of advice where I actually believe there is no other hand. So there are these things that are just unequivocally true. At least that's what I think. The first one is, be lucky. Now, that may sound a little bit strange because luck is usually something that we think of not actively being, but just, we're either lucky or we're not, it's out of our hands. But I don't think that's true. I think you can actually do a lot to be more lucky. You can do it by recognizing opportunities. You can do it by just having a positive attitude. You can do it by embracing serendipity. You can do it by just going out and talking to a stranger. All of these things will just make sure that you recognize the luck when it stands in front of you. The second thing, and again, that's probably not the kind of entrepreneurial advice that is usually given, but I think it's very, very important, is be kind. And I don't necessarily mean be soft or be nice. Sometimes you got to be tough, and sometimes you have tough negotiations and so forth. But be nice to people. This sounds really obvious, but I've seen so many people who are not following this advice. So really, I think this is incredibly important for long-term success. Be nice. Value relationships, including the personal ones. It's so easy to get wrapped up in all your entrepreneurial problems and challenges to kind of, feel that you don't have time for anything else, but you do, and you should make time for that. Be nice to people. Help them, even if there is nothing immediately for you to gain out. I tell you, karma is real, and it's coming back. It's coming back. So those are the two things where I really think there is no other hand, there is only one hand. For everything else, there's usually one hand, and there's the other hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, and we're going to give you as well a voucher for your Instagram pictures.
Oh, perfect. Now this is in English.
Swedish.
I didn't fully follow it before.
Swedish. And we're going to give you one of those cool computers, Raspberry Pi computers that you have heard of those? You know, the small computers that is sort of, it's pretty inexpensive, but it's a pretty capable computer, able to, well, you need to bring your screen and your keyboard and your mouse, most of that, but it's otherwise it's perfectly well working. It's the coolest thing around in the computer space.
Thank you.
Great. A few questions. To first start with, around the world, the Sandbox community is not only in the US, it's around the world. Do you see any differences when it comes to entrepreneurship, or sort of compared to US compared to Europe, for example, or in Asia? Is it different, or is it the same kind of people that you meet?
So there's definitely differences, but before we talk about differences, I think what I've been really surprised by is there are entrepreneurial people everywhere. They're not just in the US, they're not just in Europe, they're really everywhere. In each small community you find people that have this desire to build new things. But there are differences, and I think one of the things that I very briefly talked about before is this culture of failing. And again, failing has always two sides. Failing is not necessarily just good per se, but it's good to have a culture that accepts failure as a necessary part of entrepreneurship, that isn't punishing, that allows you to start. Culture is one element of it. There's also a legal perspective of it, right? So you have to have a corporate law that actually does not drive you into personal bankruptcy if your first company fails. And I think definitely there, I've lived in the US for a while now, but as I said, I'm originally from Switzerland, which is a very risk-averse culture. And I definitely see the differences there of people just in the US just trying. They just go out, they're not smarter, they don't have it figured out more than Europeans, if anything, maybe even the contrary. But they just believe they can do it. They just think bigger. They just have this idea that they can go out and raise $1 quadrillion for their new startup, and because they believe it, it actually works. And I think here in Europe, and again, like I can't really speak for Sweden, but I can speak for Switzerland, and it seems from this chart that we're similar. In certain respects, both very innovative countries, but there's still this sort of this culture of, we'll try a little bit and we're trying it small and then maybe it works. And I think there just needs to be a little bit more, I don't know, having fun with taking risks. It works, as long as you have a parachute thingy.
Sure. At the same time, I think we have sort of a growing set of entrepreneurs, and we talk a lot about the successes of companies like Spotify or other Swedish companies that have been, Skype is another one that is based out of Sweden. And I think that in my community and the people that I meet really would love to be more of entrepreneurs. And we talked about that previously, or rather yesterday, and you talked about maybe this can turn out to be more of a cult, that people are sort of in a bad way trying to be entrepreneurs even if they shouldn't be. What do you think? Are we talking too much about it? Is everyone in this room equipped with the resources and the abilities to be entrepreneurs, or should we sort of try to be
Well, obviously, everybody in this room is going to be hugely successful.
Yes,
it's more the problem with everybody who's not in this room right now. So yeah, I do think, but again, this is probably more a problem at this point right now in the US than in European countries. I do think there's slowly a danger of entrepreneurship becoming kind of a meme, right? So everybody's talking about it, and if you think back in the 90s, everybody wanted to be an investment banker, and that didn't really turn out great. So now everybody wants to be Mark Zuckerberg. And it's great, and I think it's much better than wanting to be an investment banker, obviously, but still, I sometimes wonder, and this is also why what I said before about the, being a two-handed entrepreneur to me is so incredibly important, because I think that it's not just a simple set of rules that you can follow that will bring you to success. It's really something that you have to figure out. The beautiful thing about entrepreneurship is that the entrepreneurs that are really successful are usually the ones that don't follow the rules, but that break them. So it's kind of hard to kind of make this into a big popular movement where all of a sudden everybody's becoming an entrepreneur. In the US especially, there's this big talk about people not going to college anymore. Peter Thiel, who's one of the founders of PayPal and other things, has created this foundation where he pays people $100,000 to not go to college but start their own businesses instead. And while I kind of like the idea, I also think there's a danger in, all of a sudden believing that you can skip pretty much all formal education and just go out and start your business. I don't think that's true, and I think we need to sort of balance this a little bit out. And I think it's great if people become entrepreneurs, but only if they really kind of have this desire to be it.
Sure, and we can talk about the problems with the schooling system, and we guess you've heard of the quote. You guys
don't have any problems with that, right?
Sorry?
Sweden doesn't have any education
problems. Well, we do have our set of problems, and we, to be honest, and we all know the Mark Twain quote when his mother asked why he dropped out of school, and he answered, "I didn't want school to be in my way of my education," something like that. Which is a good quote, I think. We talked about, you mentioned Facebook and Zuckerberg. What do you think about the IPO of Twitter? Is that good for the company, or is it bad?
I'm not sure if it's going to be good in the short term for the company. I think something similar may happen to Twitter than happened to Facebook, whose stock kind of after the IPO languished for a bit, but is now picking up again. I do think it's good for the sort of ecosystem, for the entrepreneurial ecosystem, that we see some of these companies going public now. Not necessarily because I believe that, so Twitter is a great company, but let's be honest, they don't make that much money yet. They may be at some point, but right now they're still they're growing up, but they're definitely not where they want to be. But I think it's great for these internet companies to be facing a market. That market's not going to be perfect. That market may unjustly punish them. But I think it's good that we're seeing them actually going out in the open. But I'm not. I can't give you a buy or not buy recommendation for Twitter stock at this point.
And talking about we heard about Twitter and Facebook. What about the companies that we haven't heard about yet? What's the coolest project that you come around lately that you think really is really fascinating startups at this time?
Now you would like to have a list, right? Ha. This is probably a good point to mention that, as Magnus said, I flew in from New York, and it's about 4 a.m. local time in New York right now, so I apologize if my brain works slowly.
You can give me the list afterwards.
I'll give you the list. I'll give you the list in private afterwards.
Perfect.
No, so I definitely think that I don't have a list of companies, but I think the entire field of personalized healthcare is something that we're going to see a lot about. So I think right now everybody's talking about the revolution in finance, and there's a lot of good stuff coming our way, I think, in what is usually referred to as the fintech space. But I think the really big stuff is coming a little bit later, and it's going to be companies like 23andMe, who are doing DNA tests, and a lot of other companies who will help you sort of track your health and well-being. I think you talked about a company before as well that sort of has this quantified self idea of measuring everything.
Sure.
I'm wearing this thingy on my wristband that it's a Jawbone Up that measures your sleep and measures your steps. And I think there we're going to see a lot. So this is still very early days for that, but I think there's a lot of movement, a lot of innovation coming our way there.
Great, thanks. Do we have any questions from or comments on Twitter, Fredrik?
Hello.
Yep.
Not that many questions actually, but a lot of people.
Everybody agrees with me?
A lot of people love your presentation slides. They really love it. So, and they're really referring to a lot of things you said, but not that many direct questions actually.
Okay, cool. So thank you very much for coming, and you'll be around and have a cup of coffee, I guess, or do you need to get some sleep right away?
No, I'll be here. I'll be here drinking lots of coffee.
Yeah.
And
great. And it's going to be Swedish coffee, so it's going to be great. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. You need this?
I'll take it. Thanks.